Hey y'all, this is my presentation. Wanted to introduce you first to Diana Khoi Nguyen. She's a poet and multimedia artist, the author of two books, Ghost of, which was a finalist for the National Book Award and also the winner of the Omnis on Open contest, which was selected by Terrence Hayes, published in 2018, and Root Fractures, which was published in 2024. She currently teaches in the Randolph College Low Residency MFA and at the University of Pittsburgh. I wanted to start us off with a reading of her poem Triptych, which is in her book Ghost of. And I first encountered this poem on the Verses podcast interview that she did with Danette Smith and Franny Choi. So I'm actually going to allow her to read the poem. So I hope you enjoy.
I'm Diana Khoi Nguyen, reading Triptych from my book Ghost of. 2 years before his suicide in 2014, my brother cut himself out of all the family photographs which hung in the house of our childhood home. The poems work in that space and also around this space, and it's a way for me to feel I can reach towards him. Triptych. With eyes closed, he waits for his body to do the same. A fistful of grains, rice let go from the hand of a symbolist. First, the rainstorm, then trio of crickets. A stream, then a trickle like someone who has the hands of a mother or father to guide him. But the house is empty. He is emptying out every hour, all hours before his death. He is dangerously close to living. His body is warm, his mind cool. What are the tricks for warming? He no longer feels the watch against his wrist. He no longer feels a wrist. He no longer. What may exist between appearance and disappearance, between sound and silence, as something that is nearly nothing? Slow music, quiet music, spare music. Of sound and form, I fell asleep tonight after feeding us both. It was hard to think of you cold. It was hard to think. You think it was hard to think of you? It was hard to think. Well, I slept soundful. The wind howled and wet its whistling teeth. It has sound, but no form. What has a form but no sound? There is no sound for everyone. Not everyone has a sound. There is no sound, for there is no sound there for everyone, is there? Anyone between the sound and the silence, some solitary figure ambling along the loop. No sound in which the performer is silent. He is a point departing. No sound overtaking sound to the verge of vanishing. Oh, sound, not one, no one silhouetted against the empty scores, no duration to mark, but still a space to occupy, an occupation. Tonight, I fed you first, then myself, and fell asleep. We have departed from the cage. That is not a space we occupy. A sister who is dreaming becomes a sister in another sister's dream moment. Terribly forgetting that music is playing. Something startled me. A voice in the room I thought was empty. Did you jump over? Did you jump back? Over and back? Did you jump back? Did you? Over here, I stretch the replay across the year and longer. It keeps me alive. It keeps me alive. It keeps alive. It keeps me alive. It keeps me alive. It keeps me alive. It keeps me alive. It keeps.
So Triptych is a 47-line poem that spans 3 pages in the book Ghost of. It starts with the family photograph. Then on the next page is a poem inside the image of the speaker's brother's removed picture. And then the final page is a prose poem that moves around the same image and creates a silhouette of the image. The poem is about the moment of the speaker's brother's death, and there's a focus on how in the moments before death, that is when a person is the closest they can be to living. So in lines 19 to 22, she mentions all hours before his death, he is dangerously close to living. And as she mentioned in the video, this poem is very much a way to like reach towards the speaker's brother and to interact with him even after he has passed. It uses sound as a metaphor for living and silence as a metaphor for death. So in the line 36, that says, "Is there anyone between the sound and the silence?" This poem is looking at occupying liminal spaces and how the speaker can do this back and forth dance with a loved one that has passed away, in that moment of liminality. It's that moment of like in-betweenness that she's trying to make contact with her brother. This poem is a very great example of how to create new forms of eulogy to interact with the dead. So in lines 46 and 47 at the very end, she has that repetition of "it keeps me alive, it keeps me alive." The repetition does provide some emphasis, but I think there's such a beautiful irony in how the poem ends focused on what keeps the speaker alive at the moment of her brother's death. And it's almost as if it's a way to remind the reader of what continues on after a person dies, which is so beautiful in grief work poetry of like having to live in those spaces where that a person is no longer. So triptych. This poem very much made me want to interview Nguyen because of her focus on like grief work and processing family trauma, but also because I'm very interested in performance poetry and especially how to translate performance dynamics onto the page. This poem very beautifully finds a way to articulate how a poem should be read through the use of visual image and absence on the page, which you can see from the video. She's creating like echoes of how the poem should be read using an image or an absence of an image. And even within that, like in line 37, she mentions there's no sound in which the performer is silent, right? And I think there's this like really beautiful irony in the performer taking moments of silence in a performance piece about silence in a poem that focuses on silence, right? And it creates this moment where it's like the poem itself is aware of its own silence. Um, and I think very much that this silence is creating moments of silence as a way to play with like the white space of a performance. And also, of course, taking moments of silence for the dead. There's a lot going on in this poem, but the way that she was able to play with silence and absence and represent that on a page definitely drew me to Nguyen's work. And I very much wanted to interview her to understand like how on earth did she create something like this. So most of my questions focused on process and like where her mind is at when she's crafting something like this. So the interview excerpt that I posted, the question that I asked her, I was listening to a podcast interview from her, and she talks about how like when she's writing poems inside of an image like that, like the first part of triptych, she isn't writing the poem and then trying to figure out how to fit it in the image, but she's writing the poem in the image already itself, which I thought was so fascinating. And so the question I asked her was, when writing in confined spaces, how do you make sure each line ends powerfully while still working within the constraints of the form? And shout out to Serena for that question. That was in your response to me, Serena, so thank you. And the response I got was, it's like moss, of course. And she explained that like moss is looking for opportunities in conditions where they can exist, and the places that they can exist are very remarkable. because they can exist in like deserts or in these tiny little crevices. And all they need is a little bit of moisture and like nothing else growing. And all they have to do is focus on growing one tiny little piece. And then once that's there, they can grow another piece. And they're not getting overwhelmed by filling up the entire space. They're just focusing on one piece at a time. And her, at the end of the answer, she was talking about how like this is how I think about writing, knowing that there's a limitation, but not trying to bend completely to that limitation. This excerpt of the interview was probably my favorite. It surprised me a lot because I've never thought about writing in this way. To me, form feels very constricting and confined spaces feel very scary to write in. But to think of it as just taking like one word or one letter at a time is such a beautiful way to like flip that fear. And especially when writing grief poetry, it's a way to very radically come into connection with what you're writing because you have to really focus on what you're doing. And it's a perfect way to show how to process grief through writing. I thought that this part of the interview very much encapsulates Wynn's thinking because she talked a lot about play and opportunity. She only writes in 15-day segments twice a year. And for the rest of the year, she's either reading or teaching or she's practicing other art forms. And the way that she approaches any art form she's engaging in is to look for moments of play. And she approaches with this like very fresh curiosity of how to create something. And it just inspired so much in me when it comes to writing. Um, so very much this conversation about moss is about like how she's constantly searching for like how can I play and how can I find an opportunity to stretch myself as an artist and what will come out when I make this tiny little move like a moss leaf. Um, so what I learned from this interview was very much about artistic process, her approach to creation as a way for the artist to focus on what they are experiencing through art is definitely something that I'm going to take away from this interview. And that impacted me a lot. It was a really amazing interview. Literary magazines. So to be completely honest, finding magazines to accept this interview is probably going to be a challenge because her most recent book was published a year and a half ago. But I'm going to try anyways. So Poetry Magazine, I know, is a really, really big name to shoot for, but she's also a fairly well-known poet. Like a lot of people read her work, and especially after the publishing of her first book, she gained a lot of popularity. So they might be interested in that interview, and especially an interview on process and how she creates these things. The next two, The Margins and Slanted, are both magazines that are interested in interviews by Asian American writers with Asian American writers, which I thought would be a perfect place to try to submit this. And then the last two, the Adroit Journal and Archetype Magazine, they both accept interviews from emerging writers, and they're very interested in understanding perspectives of writers with very unique voices. And since Wynn has such a unique voice and such a unique approach to how she creates, I'm going to try to see if they are interested in publishing this as well. So yes, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed.